Welcome back to Fossil Ridge Games. Today's video is going to be a deck build for Marvel Champions living card game, specifically Wasp, using the leadership aspect. Here is the build. First, you're going to take all of the Wasp hero cards. Next, one copy of your basic resources, Energy, Genius, and Strength. 2 copies of the Power of Leadership. Basic resource stuff, Avengers Mansion, Helicarrier, Quinn Carrier, basic survival stuff, Downtime, Endurance. Next, we're going to have 1 copy of Team Training, 3 copies of First Aid, 3 copies of Ready for Action. Now we're going to go into the unique allies that are present. Ant-Man, U.S. Agent, Falcon, Squirrel Girl, Maria Hill, Goliath, Hawkeye, Nick Fury, War Machine, and Ironheart. This deck focuses on a build that is very, very mental centric, and what that means is that a lot of the cards in this deck specifically have the mental resource icon on them, and it was kind of meant to synergize with Wasp's alter ego, Nadia. So kind of to get into what makes this deck kind of fun and what makes it a little bit different is Nadia's action that she can use in alter ego mode. So what you can do is basically cycle cards from your discard pile back into your deck. And in order to do that, it has to have the mental resource icon on it. What's great about this ability, you can do 2 at the same time and shuffle them back into your deck. So kind of ask yourself, what are some cards that you would like to see over and over again when you're playing through your entire draw deck? Are there some cards that you would like to see play again and again? And I figured, yeah, we could kind of make this work. We're going to focus on allies that have both the mental resource here, and then a lot of them have triggered effects when they come into play. So you'll kind of get the idea of it. It's kind of fun to bring these people back over and over again, and it's very, very cost effective. So I'll show you kind of how this works. Here's a quick example of 2 very, very cheap allies that I love, and I've played these a million times. First one's Maria Hill. Same thing, you got a mental resource, and it allows each player to draw a card. Squirrel Girl hits all of the enemies for 1 point of damage. So think about cycling these a couple times. Late game, when you have enough resource generation, you can cycle Nick Fury. Obviously, he has a bunch of triggered effects when he comes into play. Another fun card, and this is new to the Wasp set, is Ironheart. Once you place this card into play, you can draw a card. That's also pretty cool. And once again, you see the theme. They all have the mental resource. Here is a fun opening turn sort of trick that you can do by utilizing this. Now remember, to use the alter ego ability, you just need to have a card with a mental resource on it. So one of the great things about this deck is that let's say you want to play out the Quinn Carrier, which costs 3 resources. You can use both the Genius and the War Machine from your hand. You can use those as resources. They go into your discard pile. Then immediately you can use Nadia's special ability to basically shuffle them back into your draw deck. So even though you're using these 2 cards on the first turn to bring out something cool, you can immediately shuffle them into your deck, so you don't have to lose some of those great cards on the opening turn. Something I noticed too, and this can be kind of frustrating, sometimes in your opening hand you get some really heavy cards. Let's say you have the Avengers Mansion, maybe the Quinn Carrier as well. These both also have the mental resource. You can burn one of these, use them as a resource, and then cycle it back into your deck, and you're going to get it back. So that's a kind of a cool way to, maybe dump something that's a little bit heavier on your first turn of the Avengers Mansion if you can't pay for it. But then you know that it's going into your draw deck, and then you can draw it back potentially later in the game when you have more resources. Let's take this idea just one step further. Notice that a lot of the really cool Wasp cards that I have out on the table, these also have the mental resource that are listed on them. Literally one of the best ones that you can recycle probably during this whole entire strategy is this Pinpoint Strike. For only 3 cost, you can hit for 7 damage. Now if you're in tiny form, you hit for 8 damage and it gains overkill. So this card is ridiculous. It hits like a freight train, and you can use it over and over again. Now the hero cards have 3 copies of Pinpoint Strike. Now imagine just, once or twice or even 3 or 4 times over the course of the game, if you're using Nadia's recycle action with those mental cards, you can pull multiple copies of this and use those over and over again. So you can significantly increase your damage output by simply doing this. Another technique or tactic, you can use this Wasp Sting. It's a little bit cheaper. I think honestly for the 1 extra resource, it's definitely worth cycling the Pinpoint Strike back into your deck. But let's say you've cycled all of the Pinpoint Strikes back into your draw deck. What gets super potent is when you only have, let's say, 10 cards left in your draw deck, and you cycle some of these power cards back in, you're going to have a really nasty set of turns right when your deck is being diminished. And then the other one on the right-hand side is Giant Help. This is a great one to remove threats. So something else to be mindful of, let's say you're getting overwhelmed and there are too many threats on either the main scheme or the side schemes and they're building up. You can start cycling cards that you need to win into your deck so you're more likely to get them. So then what you can do is start cycling in Giant Help. And then that helps you whittle away those threats. Now imagine you've got 2 copies of this in your discard pile. You use your special ability in Alter Ego mode. You take these, they go directly into your draw deck, and you have to shuffle it obviously. But it's going to give you a pretty likely chance that you're going to be drawing these cards, and it's going to be helping you out. So think of Nadia's Alter Ego special ability is something that can help you. It's very, very versatile, and you can use it for almost anything. But just remember, it always triggers off of these mental resources, and that's why you're going to see so many of these built into the deck. Let's talk about Wasps Survival really quick. One thing I really like about Wasps, specifically in giant form, is that, and you can see it right here, that she has a defense of 3, and that's very, very good. That's excellent for those defensive actions when you're getting attacked by the villain. Something else that obviously you want to put in your basic sort of survival cards, but something else that I felt was kind of fun is putting in these first aid cards. And you're going to notice that these also have the mental resource on them as well, so you can cycle those using your Alter Ego ability. On Nadia as well, so you can use this action. So you can use the first aids to enhance your survivability, and there's kind of a cool trick you can do, and I'll show you that in a second. Pim Particles, there are 2 copies of this card in the Wasp deck. This is really great, especially if you're in giant form. You can heal 2 damage from your hero. Now, something I noticed, by having 2 copies of Pim Particles in your deck, and there's 3 copies of First Aid in here, oftentimes I have them together. So what's kind of cool, especially when you're in giant form, and you really want to heal some wounds, but not necessarily flop into your Alter Ego mode, which can sometimes take the momentum out of your attacks, what you can do is spend the Pim Particles to pay for the First Aid. So you're going to be healing 4 points of damage. And no, you have to be in giant form for this, but it's kind of a cool trick. And I saw it time and time again when I was playing this deck. It seemed like I had them often enough that I was able to execute this numerous times. Something else is that I typically hold on to the Pim Particle until I am in my giant form and I want to actually pay for something. So that's another piece of advice. Drawing the card is great when you're in tiny form, but sometimes you just need to heal. And if you do, go ahead and use the Pim Particles in conjunction with First Aid, or use them separately. Either of those are fine as well, but you can kind of increase your survivability. Any hero with 11 hit points or lower, they can get kind of squishy and they can get taken out by the villain pretty quickly. If the villain multi-attacks in a single turn, that can be devastating. So go ahead and check out that combo. More on survival, and I found this pretty cool. So 1 copy of Team Training can go into your deck, and each of your allies gets an extra hit point. That's pretty cool. Now, you're not necessarily going to be using that to soak up damage. You're going to be using that so you can activate them an additional time. Now, the other thing, though, I found really fun is Ready for Action, and this is something I mixed into the deck, and once again, it has the mental resource on the corner. You can cycle these as well, is that you have a fair number of allies, and what I found really fun is that you can play Ready for Action to throw a tough status card on them. So let's say they only have, 1 hit point left. Maybe you have Squirrel Girl and she just has 1 point left, and you're fighting a really nasty villain. We'll go ahead and use this Ready for Action card. You can kind of supercharge Squirrel Girl or whatever ally you want, and they can soak up a nasty hit from a villain. Of course, if they don't have piercing, but for the most part, you can soak up one of those big hits. Sometimes it's 6, 7, 8 points of damage, and that's a big advantage. And for only one resource, I found these very, very useful in this deck. These next 3 cards, there's only one copy of each of them in the deck, but I just kind of want to show them off if you're kind of new to the Wasp hero character. This is more just information for you. But you have the Wasp's helmet, and this is a little bit strange, and whenever you have it out, you have to just make sure that you read it, because when Wasp is in large sort of form, her thwart goes up, but when she's in tiny form, her attack goes up. So that might be a little bit counterintuitive, but go ahead and remember that. And then the Red Room training is kind of cool. And it's the same thing. You're just going to have to play the deck several times to remember which one's which. But when you're in giant form, Wasp can retaliate at 1, which is kind of cool. So you have the defense of 3 when you're in giant form. So that's kind of cool. You can hit the enemy back. And then when you're in tiny form, you have piercing. So piercing, you can cut through those tough status cards and just like blast right through them. So that's pretty cool as well. And then finally, we have the biosynthetic wings. And this one is a little bit odd. It really only works when you're in the tiny mode. And it allows you to exhaust the card and prevent 1 point of damage. So it's almost like a little bit of an armor, but only works in her tiny form. So those are some cool cards that are included in the set. Once again, you just kind of have to play Wasp several times so you start to get the basics of these 3 sort of unique upgrades that she has. And then finally, I'll just show off the Ant-Man card. So every hero has a unique sort of ally that comes with the set. So Ant-Man is the one. Same sort of thing as you've seen with the previous set of cards. It's just slightly different based upon if you're in giant or tiny form. And then secondarily, we also have 2 copies of Rapid Growth in the deck. Now, if you have played the Ant-Man hero, it's very, very oriented toward changing form. You're doing it often. This deck, I think, you're not going to change forms nearly as much. It doesn't seem to be as impactful. There's not a lot of those trigger effects when you do change form. This one does, though, have 2 copies of Rapid Growth, and it specifically triggers when you go into your giant form. So think of it as, let's say you want to thwart, attack, or defend, then you can play this to interrupt it, and then you kind of grow into your giant form, and then any one of those abilities that you used gets +2. So that's kind of cool. If you really are having a hard time maybe blocking, maybe you only have a few hit points left, and you really need to soak up some damage, you can get a 5 defense out of this card, which is really, really great. That seems to be what I was using it most for, is just like, hey, I just got a little bit out of alignment. I didn't have very many hit points, and then, the villain was going to hit me, and I only have like 2 or 3 hit points left. So I can soak up a lot of damage. So Rapid Growth is one of those cards that you can use as an interrupt, and I kind of recommend it for a more defensive sort of thing. You can obviously use it to gain an extra couple thwart or attack, but really where it shines is keeping you alive during a big hit. To summarize, this is a great and fun deck if you kind of like recycling some of your allies, and you also like recycling some of your attack cards, specifically Pinpoint Strike. I found time and time again, especially in the late game, when you have a lot of your upgrades and supports out on the table in conjunction with allies, the Wasp deck gets pretty thin, it gets pretty small, and that makes it more likely for you to get things like your Pinpoint Strike cards. Now, think of it this way too, especially if you're using her Alter Ego ability and you're recycling these cards, and there's 3 copies of these Pinpoint Strikes. Now you're going to recycle, all of these copies into a smaller deck. You're really going to saturate the deck with these heavy hitting cards. And to be quite honest, for 3 cost, when you're in tiny mode, 8 damage and overkill, that's pretty wild. So you can really keep the minions down, and you can keep hammering on the villain at the same time. And so like I said, like kind of late game when your deck is thin, this is where this really takes off, and it gets super crazy. And her damage output, it's just like hitting over and over and over again. It's just like she pummels and pounds the villain into paste. So that's a very, very cool thing. Thank you for joining me today, and as always, have fun gaming.